Who let this filthy old man set foot in my area?
The diner went silent.
Please, officer. I'm just here for breakfast. I haven't...
Prescott grabbed his collar and slammed him face first into the table. Coffee shattered on the floor. He dragged Vernon off the booth, drove a knee into his spine, and wrenched his arm back until something popped.
Scum like you brings crime everywhere it goes.
Vernon's cheek ground against cold tile.
Let me go. I can't breathe.
A child buried her face in her mother's arm. The waitress stared at the floor. Then the front door swung open. 4 men in pressed military uniforms stepped inside. The diner fell dead quiet, and the sergeant's knee, still pinning Vernon to the ground, began to shake. But that moment hadn't happened yet. 3 hours earlier, the morning fog clung to the 2-lane road that cut through Gray Hill, Georgia, like a wound that never healed. Population 4,000. 1 traffic light. The kind of town where strangers were spotted before they reached the sidewalk. Vernon Atkins walked along the shoulder of that road. His combat boots' soles worn smooth as river stones hit the asphalt in a cadence that hadn't broken in 30 years. Left, right, a rhythm that outlasted the marriage, the house, the job, the will to ask anyone for help. He was 55, tall, lean the way hunger carves a man, cheekbones sharp, jaw wired, tight eyes sunk into a face that had stopped expecting anything from anyone. His military jacket, olive drab, faded to the color of ash, hung from his shoulders like a flag that had survived too many storms. A tear along the left elbow. A zipper that broke 2 winters ago. Beneath it, a flannel shirt buttoned 1 hole off. Cargo pants worn transparent at the knees, and a canvas backpack that held every single thing he owned on this earth. But his spine was iron. 30 years of standing at attention had welded it into place. His eyes swept the road ahead with the quiet vigilance of a man who once watched for IEDs in valleys most Americans couldn't find on a map. Rosie's Diner sat at the corner of Main and Burkhalter, flat-roofed, a neon sign that buzzed louder than it glowed. The breakfast crowd, 7 people if you could call it a crowd, was already inside. Farmers, a postal worker, a mother and her daughter splitting toast. Vernon pushed through the glass door. The bell jingled once. Heads turned, eyes traveled the same route they always did, face, jacket, backpack. The arithmetic was instant, black, homeless. Not from here. He chose the farthest booth, corner seat, back against the wall, a habit that kept him alive in Fallujah and kept him invisible everywhere else. Rosie Callahan, 70 years old, silver hair pinned up flour dusted across her apron, brought coffee before he asked. She set the mug down and paused, not at his clothes, at his posture, shoulders pinned back, chin level, the architecture of a man who had served. Military, she asked. Vernon wrapped both hands around the mug. Warmth crawled into his cracked knuckles, his scarred fingers. He nodded once. Long time ago, ma'am. My husband was military too, Rosie said quietly. I know the spine. Something shifted behind Vernon's eyes. Not quite a smile. The memory of one. Thank you for the coffee, ma'am. Rosie topped off his mug without being asked and moved back behind the counter. She didn't ask if he could pay. She didn't need to. Some things you just recognize. Vernon drank slowly. The coffee was thin and bitter, but it was hot and it was given without a question, and those 2 things hadn't happened together in longer than he cared to remember. His last hot meal, a shelter in Macon 4 days ago. The one before that dissolved into the blur of months spent sleeping under overpasses and eating whatever a food bank hadn't discarded. He set the mug down, stared at the steam curling off the surface. For a moment, just one, the diner felt safe. Warm light, the clink of forks, the low murmur of people who had nowhere urgent to be. Then tires crunched gravel outside. A Crown Victoria with Gray Hill County Sheriff markings nosed into the lot. The engine cut. The driver's door swung wide, and a boot hit the ground, glossy black leather polished to a mirror finish. A boot that had never crossed a battlefield, never carried its owner anywhere that cost him anything. Sergeant Wade Prescott climbed out. 38, soft hands, a gut that strained against his starched uniform like it was testing every stitch. His chest was lined with badges, administrative commendations, a community outreach pin, a marksmanship ribbon from a range he visited twice a year. His duty belt, heavy with every tool the county issued, gleamed in the pale morning light. All maintained, none tested. He cracked his gum, adjusted the Oakley sunglasses perched on his head, walked toward the diner entrance with the loose, rolling stride of a man who had mistaken authority for ownership. The bell jingled. Prescott filled the doorway. His small eyes swept the room, not searching for trouble, but shopping for it. They stopped on Vernon Atkins, the old man in the corner booth, black, ragged jacket, backpack on the seat beside him, drinking coffee like he belonged here. Prescott's jaw slowed on the gum. He hitched his belt higher over his belly, straightened the badge on his chest, and started toward the corner booth with a look that had nothing to do with protecting anyone. It was the look of a man who had already chosen his prey. Prescott stopped at the edge of Vernon's booth. He didn't greet him, didn't introduce himself, just stood there, thumbs hooked into his duty belt, looking down at Vernon the way a man looks at something stuck to his shoe. "ID," Prescott said, not a request, an order. Vernon set the mug down carefully. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, slow, deliberate, both hands visible. The gesture of a man who understood what sudden movements could cost someone who looked like him. He placed a worn veteran's identification card on the table, edges soft, laminate peeling, but the name was clear. Vernon Atkins, United States Army, honorably discharged. Prescott picked it up with 2 fingers, held it at arm's length like it carried a disease, squinted at it for half a second, then tossed it onto the table. It skidded through a puddle of spilled coffee. "Veteran," Prescott said, tasting the word like it amused him. "That's what they all say. Every bum on every corner's got a story. Marine, Ranger, Special Forces." He snorted. "Funny how none of you can hold a job, but you all served your country." Vernon's jaw tightened. He picked up his ID, wiped the coffee off with his sleeve, and slid it back into his pocket. He said nothing. Prescott leaned down, close enough that Vernon could smell the peppermint gum and cheap aftershave. "I got a call. Someone in here says you're making them uncomfortable. So I'm going to need you to explain to me why you're in this establishment." No one had called. Every person in the diner knew it. The postal worker stared at his eggs. The farmer by the window suddenly found his newspaper fascinating. The mother pulled her daughter closer and kept her eyes on the table. "I'm a paying customer, sir," Vernon said, quiet, measured. "I ordered coffee. I haven't spoken to anyone. I haven't moved from this seat." A paying customer. Prescott straightened up and looked around, the diner arms spread wide, performing for the audience. "You hear that, folks? This gentleman says he's a paying customer." He turned back to Vernon. "How much that coffee cost you? $1.50. And how long you planning to sit here nursing it all day, all week, until the smell drives everyone else out?" A couple near the door shifted in their seats. The woman whispered something to the man. He shook his head. "Don't get involved." Prescott rapped his knuckles on the table twice. "Torres, get in here." Deputy Nolan Torres stepped through the door. 26, lean, Latino. His uniform fit him like it was borrowed. He scanned the scene, Prescott looming over an old man in a corner booth and his mouth pressed into a thin line. Something in his gut told him this was wrong, but he walked over anyway, stood behind Prescott, said nothing. "The bag," Prescott said, pointing at Vernon's canvas backpack. "Open it." "On what grounds?" Vernon asked. Still calm, still seated. His voice carried the patience of a man who had endured worse than this, far worse, and survived. "On the grounds that I said so." Prescott grabbed the backpack off the seat before Vernon could respond. He upended it onto the table. Everything Vernon owned spilled out under fluorescent light. A rolled-up pair of socks with a hole in the toe. A t-shirt gray folded with military precision despite its frayed collar. A plastic bag with a toothbrush and a razor. A creased photograph, a woman and a young boy smiling in a kitchen that didn't exist anymore. And a small tin box dented at the corners, held shut with a rubber band. Vernon stared at his belongings spread across the table like evidence from a crime scene. His throat worked, his hands flat on the table pressed down hard, holding something back. "Look at this," Prescott said loud enough for the whole diner. He picked up the photograph, held it between two fingers. "Who's this, the family that got smart enough to leave?" Vernon's eyes went dark. Not angry, something past anger, something deeper and older and heavier. "Put that down." His voice dropped to a register that made Torres take a half step back. "Please." Prescott studied him for a moment, then smiled the kind of smile that has no warmth in it, only teeth, and flicked the photograph onto the pile of clothes. "What's in the box?" Vernon didn't answer. Prescott reached for the tin box. Vernon's hand shot out and covered it. For 1 second, two men stared at each other across a diner table, one with a badge and a gun and every advantage the system could hand him, and one with nothing but a tin box and the memory of what was inside it. Prescott's smile widened. He pried Vernon's fingers off one by one, slowly, making sure Vernon felt every single bit of it. Then he picked up the box, snapped the rubber band off, and opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, a purple heart, a silver star, and a bronze star with a V device for valor. Prescott stared at them, then looked at Vernon, then back at the medals, and laughed. Rosie Callahan set down the coffee pot. Her voice cut across the diner like a blade. "That's enough. He's my customer, and he hasn't done a thing wrong." Prescott didn't even turn around. "Ma'am, unless you want me looking into your health code violations, your liquor license, and whatever else I find when I start digging, I suggest you go back to pouring coffee and let me do my job." Rosie's mouth opened, then closed. She gripped the counter edge until her knuckles went white. And in the corner booth, Vernon Atkins watched his medals sit in a stranger's hands and said nothing at all. Prescott held the Purple Heart up to the light, turned it slowly between his thick fingers like a coin he'd found in a parking lot. The ribbon dangled swaying. "Well, well, well," he whistled low. "Where'd you get this pawn shop, Goodwill? Or did you pull it off a dead man's chest?" Vernon's hands curled into fists beneath the table. His knuckles went white, but he didn't move, didn't speak. 30 years of military discipline held him in that seat, like a chain bolted to the floor. Prescott turned to Torres, holding the medal out like a prop in a comedy act. "Torres, come look at this. Our friend here's got a Purple Heart and a silver star." He shook the tin box. The bronze star rattled inside. "Hell, he's got the whole collection. Must have been one hell of a Halloween costume." Torres glanced at the medals. His throat moved. He'd seen enough military funerals in his hometown to know what those ribbons meant. But he looked at Prescott's face, flushed, grinning, daring anyone to contradict him, and said nothing. "You know what I think?" Prescott set the medals on the table, not gently. The Purple Heart clinked against the formica. "I think you found these in a dumpster, or stole them off some real soldier's grave, because men who earn these," he jabbed a finger at the medals, "don't end up stinking up diners in towns they don't belong in." The diner was silent, absolutely silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it, the weight of 12 people who knew they were watching something terrible and choosing to look at their plates instead. Vernon stared at the Purple Heart on the table. That medal had been pinned to his hospital gown in Landstuhl, Germany, 3 days after a roadside bomb tore through his convoy outside Fallujah. He remembered the doctor's hands, the morphine haze. The chaplain standing at the foot of his bed reading the names of the men who didn't make it to the hospital. 4 of them had been in his vehicle. The scar on his right forearm, the one that ran from wrist to elbow like a river on a map, still burned when the weather changed. Shrapnel, 3 pieces, 2 removed in surgery, 1 still lodged against the bone because the surgeon said taking it out might cost him the arm. But Prescott didn't see the scar, didn't see the man, saw the jacket, the skin, the backpack, and made his decision before he'd taken his first step. "Stand up," Prescott said. Vernon looked up at him. "Why?" "Because I told you to stand up." Prescott's hand moved to his belt, not to the gun, to the cuffs. The gesture was deliberate, a reminder of who held the power in this room. Vernon rose slowly, not in obedience, in dignity. He unfolded himself from the booth with the measured precision of a man who had stood at attention before generals, before presidents, before flag-draped coffins of friends he couldn't save. He stood at his full height, 6'2", and looked down at Prescott. For a half second, something flickered in Prescott's eyes. Not recognition, fear. The kind of fear a small man feels when he realizes the person he's been tormenting is physically, fundamentally more than him. Prescott covered it fast, stepped back, pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need 2 additional units at Rosie's Diner corner of Main and Burkhalter. Got a 1066 suspicious individual, possible vagrant, refusing to cooperate." Refusing to cooperate. Vernon had answered every question, shown his ID, sat still while his belongings were scattered across a table. And the official record would say he refused to cooperate. Within 4 minutes, 2 more cruisers pulled into the lot. Officer Brenda Hale stepped out of the first mid-30s, sharp eyes, a notebook already in her hand. Officer Kyle Dawson came from the second, young, built like a linebacker, chewing the inside of his cheek. Hale walked in, assessed the scene in 3 seconds. An elderly black man standing at a booth, belongings dumped out, medals on the table. Prescott with his chest puffed and his hand on his cuffs, and her pen stopped moving. She looked at Torres. Torres gave the smallest shake of his head. Dawson took his position near the door, arms crossed, face neutral, following protocol because that was easier than following his conscience. "Here's what's going to happen," Prescott announced, loud enough for the whole diner. He was performing now, not for Vernon, not for the officers, but for the audience. For the people in the booths who would tell this story later and remember that Sergeant Prescott handled it. "I'm detaining you on suspicion of vagrancy and public disturbance. You have the right to—" "What disturbance?" Vernon's voice was low, steady, but it carried. "I sat down, I ordered coffee, I drank it. Name the disturbance." Prescott stepped closer, close enough for Vernon to count the pores on his nose. "You are the disturbance," he said. Quiet now, almost a whisper. "Your face, your smell, your presence in my town, that's the disturbance." He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the overhead light. "Turn around." Vernon held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he turned, slowly, placed his hands behind his back, wrists together. The position as familiar as breathing, not because he'd been arrested before, but because he'd cuffed prisoners of war in the same stance and knew the geometry of surrender. The cuffs clicked shut, cold steel on warm skin. Rosie pressed both hands against her mouth. Tears ran down her cheeks and into the lines of her face. The mother at the booth near the window covered her daughter's eyes. Vernon was led toward the door. His boots worn, battered, laced with the same precision he'd used since basic training, crossed the diner floor 1 step at a time. His back was straight, his head was up, his shoulders were squared. He paused at the door, turned his head toward Rosie. "Thank you for the coffee, ma'am," he said. The same words, the same quiet voice, as if nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Outside, the Georgia morning was bright and cold and indifferent. 3 police cruisers sat in the gravel lot with their lights off. Vernon Atkins, handcuffed, humiliated, stripped of every possession he carried, stood between them and breathed. He didn't know it yet. But the ground beneath Gray Hill was about to shake. The diner exhaled the moment Vernon crossed the threshold. Conversations restarted in whispers. Forks moved again. Coffee was sipped. The machinery of normalcy cranked itself back to life, rusted and unconvincing. But the room had cracked. A man in a John Deere cap, Carl, a soybean farmer who'd eaten breakfast at Rosie's every morning for 11 years, pushed his plate forward and muttered to the man beside him. "Probably for the best. These people come through, next thing you know, stuff goes missing." His companion nodded. Didn't look up. Agreement by silence, the cheapest currency in a small town. At the counter, a woman in a real estate blazer was already composing a post on her phone. Not about injustice, about safety. About how glad she was the police were keeping the community clean. She typed with her thumbs and didn't notice the coffee cooling beside her, but not everyone chose that side. The postal worker, a thin man named Glenn, who had served 4 years in the National Guard before his knees gave out, stared at the door Vernon had just been led through. His hand was in his pocket, gripping his phone. He had recorded the last 6 minutes. Every word Prescott said, every sound Vernon's body made when it hit the table. He didn't know what to do with it yet. but he kept it. A young woman in a college sweatshirt she'd driven down from Athens to visit her grandmother had tears on her face. She hadn't wiped them. She looked at the people around her, at the farmers and the retirees and the woman typing on her phone, and her expression wasn't sadness. It was recognition. The slow, sickening recognition that she was watching something she'd only read about in textbooks, and it was happening in real time in a diner that served pecan pie and sweet tea. Rosie stood behind the counter. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking since Prescott's threat. She picked up the coffee pot, set it down, picked it up again. Her eyes were fixed on the medals still scattered on the table in the corner booth. Nobody had touched them. They sat there like evidence at a crime scene, which in a way they were. She walked over. Slowly. Her knees ached, they always did in the cold, but she made it to the booth. She gathered Vernon's belongings one by one. The socks, the folded t-shirt, the toothbrush in its plastic bag, the photograph of the woman and the boy. She held the photograph for a long moment, studied the woman's smile, the boy's missing front tooth, a kitchen with yellow curtains and a refrigerator covered in magnets. A life. A whole life reduced to a creased 3x5 tucked into a dead man's backpack. Not a dead man, she corrected herself. A living man, still living, despite everything. She placed the medals back in the tin box. Purple Heart, Silver Star, Bronze Star. She didn't know what each one meant specifically, but she knew weight when she held it. These were heavy in a way that had nothing to do with metal. She set the box in the backpack, zipped it closed, and placed it behind the counter where no one could touch it. Outside, through the plate glass window, she could see Vernon standing between the cruisers, handcuffed, still. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. Prescott was on his radio, pacing back and forth the way men pace when they want to look important. Torres stood apart from the group. He'd taken off his hat. He was holding it in both hands, turning it slowly, staring at the ground. Hale was writing in her notebook, writing a lot, and Dawson had moved to his cruiser and was sitting in the driver's seat with the door open, staring at nothing. Vernon stood alone. 3 officers around him, and he stood alone. Then his pocket buzzed. The phone, a prepaid flip phone, cracked screen, the kind you buy at a gas station for $20, vibrated against his hip. Vernon tilted his head slightly. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He couldn't reach it, but he knew who was calling. He'd made one call that morning before he walked into Gray Hill, from a payphone at a truck stop 12 miles south. The call lasted 40 seconds. He'd spoken 7 words. "I'm in Gray Hill, Rosie's Diner, Main Street." The person on the other end had said 4, "We're on our way." Vernon hadn't told anyone, hadn't mentioned it to Rosie, hadn't hinted at it when Prescott shoved his face into the table or when the cuffs clicked shut. He carried the knowledge the way he'd carried ammunition in the desert, close, quiet, and ready. Now standing in the gravel lot with his wrists locked in steel, Vernon did something that made Torres look up from his hat. He smiled. Not a big smile, not a defiant one. Just the smallest shift at the corners of his mouth, the kind of smile a man wears when he knows something no one else in the room knows. Torres saw it. It unsettled him more than anything else that morning. Prescott didn't see it. He was too busy talking into his radio, describing Vernon as a transient black male, mid-50s, possibly mentally unstable, no fixed address. 23 miles north on Interstate 75, a convoy of 5 military Humvees was making very good time. Prescott finished his radio call and clipped the handset back to his belt. He turned to Vernon with the satisfied expression of a man who had just completed important work. "Here's what happens now. We're taking you to the station. Processing, fingerprints, background check. If you're lucky, real lucky, you'll be out by tonight." He shrugged. The gesture said the rest. Vernon didn't respond. He stood in the gravel lot, hands cuffed behind his back, face tilted toward the sky. His eyes were closed. He wasn't praying. He was listening. "Torres, bring the car around. I want this on my booking." Torres hesitated. 1 beat, 2. Then he walked toward the cruiser. His boots dragged the walk of a man whose body was obeying an order his conscience had already rejected. Hale closed her notebook. 6 pages filled. "Sarge, I want to note for the record that the individual was cooperative, and I did not observe any behavior consistent with..." "Noted," Prescott cut her off. "Put it in the report, or don't." Hale's jaw tightened. She walked to her cruiser, sat behind the wheel, and started writing again. Dawson leaned against his door, arms folded. He hadn't said a word the entire time. His presence, 6'3", 240 pounds badge gun, was its own statement. Prescott grabbed Vernon's arm and steered him toward the Crown Victoria. Vernon didn't resist. His feet moved in that same cadence, left-right. The walk of a man being led to a cell. The walk of a man who had once marched through sand and gunfire without breaking stride. Then Vernon stopped. Prescott yanked his arm. "Move." "Listen," Vernon said. "I'm not interested in listen." Something in the word made Prescott pause, not the volume, the certainty, the absolute granite certainty of a man who knew exactly what was coming next. At first, nothing. The hum of ventilation, a bird, the tick of a cooling engine, then a vibration, not sound yet, a feeling. The gravel trembled, pebbles shifted, the side mirror of the Crown Victoria buzzed against its housing. Prescott looked at the ground, then up at the road. Torres froze. The sound arrived, low, deep. A diesel growl building from the south end of Main Street like thunder from a clear sky. Not one engine, many, synchronized, heavy. The first Humvee rounded the curve, sand-colored, armored, an American flag whipping from the antenna. Behind it, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, 5 military Humvees, in formation, rolling through downtown Gray Hill at 30 miles per hour. And they were not passing through. They were slowing down. Inside the diner, every face pressed against the windows. The farmer's mouth hung open. The real estate woman stopped typing. The young woman from Athens raised her phone and hit record. The convoy pulled into the lot. The lead Humvee stopped 15 feet from Vernon. Engines idled, a low, unified rumble that vibrated in the chest. 5 seconds of diesel and dust and a town holding its breath. Then the driver's door opened. A polished boot hit the ground. Not like Prescott's. Worn smooth by use. Dusty at the heel. A boot that had walked on soil in 3 countries. Colonel Diane Mercer stepped out. 52, 5'9", lean as a blade. Her dress uniform was pressed to razor edges. 2 rows of combat decorations above her left pocket. A ranger tab on her shoulder. Airborne wings on her chest. 28 years of service written in thread and metal. She removed her sunglasses, scanned the parking lot. Her eyes found Vernon handcuffed, standing between 3 cruisers, a bruise darkening on his forehead. Then she looked at Prescott, badge glinting, gut straining against his belt, still holding Vernon's arm. The temperature in the parking lot dropped 10 degrees. "Who?" she said in the exact tone of a woman accustomed to being answered immediately. "Put this man in handcuffs." Prescott's fingers opened, not voluntarily, the way a child drops something hot. "Ma'am, this is a police matter. Who are you?" She didn't answer. She walked past him, straight to Vernon, boots crunching gravel. She stopped 18 inches away, parade distance. She looked at his face, the bruise, the torn jacket, the cuffed wrists. Then Colonel Diane Mercer, 28 years of service, 3 combat deployments, commander of the 4th Brigade Support Battalion, snapped to attention. Her right hand rose to her brow in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. Behind her, doors opened. 2nd Humvee, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Soldiers stepped out, 12 in dress uniforms, boots striking gravel in unison. They formed a line, shoulder to shoulder, and one by one each raised a hand to their brow. 12 soldiers, saluting a homeless man in handcuffs. Prescott's mouth opened. No sound came out. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His radio crackled dispatch asking for an update, and he couldn't lift his hand to answer. "What?" His voice was thin, stripped bare. "What is happening?" Vernon Atkins stood in a gravel parking lot in Gray Hill, Georgia, hands cuffed behind his back, bruise on his forehead, torn jacket on his shoulders. And for the first time that morning, he lifted his chin, not in defiance, not in pride, but in recognition. The way a soldier acknowledges his unit. He was home. Colonel Mercer held the salute for 5 full seconds. Her eyes never left Vernon's face. Then she dropped her hand and turned to Prescott with the slow, controlled rotation of a turret locking onto its target. "Sergeant," she said. Her voice carried the weight of a woman who had issued orders under mortar fire. "You are currently standing with your knee mark still on the back of a man named Vernon Atkins. Master Sergeant Vernon Atkins, United States Army, 3 combat tours, 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, a Bronze Star with Valor device." She paused, let the words land like rounds hitting a steel plate. "And the Medal of Honor." The parking lot went dead. Inside the diner, someone dropped a glass. It shattered on the tile floor, and nobody flinched because every nerve in the building was aimed at the woman in uniform standing in the gravel lot. Prescott's face drained. The color left it in stages, first the flush, then the pink, then everything else, leaving a gray slack mask that looked 10 years older than it had 5 minutes ago. That's not," he swallowed. "Ma'am, there's no way. This man is a vagrant. He has no fixed address. On September 14th, 2004, Mercer continued as if he hadn't spoken. A convoy carrying 18 soldiers from the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines was hit by a coordinated IED attack outside Fallujah. The lead vehicle was destroyed. The second vehicle caught fire. 14 men were trapped." She took one step toward Prescott. He took one step back. "Master Sergeant Atkins, wounded by shrapnel in his right arm, his left leg, and his lower back, crawled out of that burning vehicle. He went back in, pulled out 2 men, came back, pulled out 2 more. The vehicle was fully engulfed. Ammunition was cooking off. Every man on that road was screaming at him to stop." Another step. Prescott backed into the hood of his cruiser, had nowhere else to go. He went back 3 more times. 3. Into fire. Into smoke so thick he couldn't see his own hands. He dragged 14 men to safety that day. 14. And when the medevac arrived, Vernon Atkins was the last man standing. He had shrapnel in 3 places, second-degree burns on both arms, and a piece of metal lodged against the bone in his right forearm that is still there today. Mercer stopped. She was close enough to Prescott now that he could see the combat infantry badge on her chest. The thing he didn't have, would never have, could never earn. He received the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States in a ceremony at Walter Reed Medical Center because he was too injured to stand at the White House. He received it lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms and bandages on his body, and he saluted the President with a hand that was missing 2 fingertips. Vernon stood still through all of it. His face showed nothing, but his eyes, those deep, dark, ancient eyes, were wet. "Now." Mercer's voice dropped to a frequency that made the air vibrate. "Take the handcuffs off." Prescott's hands shook so badly it took him 3 attempts to find the keyhole. The cuffs clicked open and fell into the gravel. The sound they made, small metallic final, was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard in that parking lot. Vernon brought his hands forward, rubbed his wrists. Red marks circled them like bracelets made of shame, someone else's shame. Mercer reached into the lead Humvee and produced a garment bag. She unzipped it. Inside hung a dress uniform, army green pressed to perfection, every ribbon and medal already in place. She held it out to Vernon. "The Pentagon sent us to find you, Master Sergeant. We've been looking for 8 months. A veteran at a shelter in Macon recognized you last week and contacted the VA who contacted us." She paused. "The President of the United States has requested your presence at a national ceremony of honor in Washington, D.C. A ceremony recognizing the 14 men whose lives you saved, and the man who saved them." Vernon looked at the uniform. His uniform. His hand reached out and touched the fabric, ran his fingers along the sleeve over the sergeant stripes across the Medal of Honor ribbon. His touch was gentle, the touch of a man reuniting with a part of himself he thought had died. "I thought you forgot," he said, barely a whisper. "The United States Army does not forget its heroes, Master Sergeant, even when everyone else does." Behind them, the diner had emptied. Every customer, every employee stood in the parking lot. Rosie was at the front, clutching Vernon's backpack to her chest, tears streaming freely. Vernon turned to her. Not to Mercer, not to the soldiers, not to the officers, to the 70-year-old woman who had brought him coffee without asking and hadn't flinched when a man with a badge threatened her livelihood. "Rosie," his voice cracked on her name, "you were the only one. The only person who gave me coffee without asking if I could pay. Who looked at me like I was a human being." Rosie couldn't speak. She held out his backpack. He took it. Their hands touched for a moment, hers small, flour-dusted, shaking, his large, scarred, steady. "You come back," she managed. "You hear me? You come back to my diner." Vernon nodded. "Once." Torres stepped forward. He removed his hat, placed it over his heart, and saluted Vernon, not the crisp, practiced salute of the soldiers, but the rough, honest salute of a young man who had just learned something about duty that the academy never taught him. Hale followed. She closed her notebook, stood straight, and saluted. Dawson, the man who hadn't spoken a single word all morning, unfolded. His arms walked to Vernon and extended his hand. Vernon took it. Dawson held the grip for a long time. Then he stepped back, drew himself to his full height, and saluted. 3 officers, 3 salutes, given to the man their sergeant had called scum. Prescott stood alone, by his cruiser. His badges caught the sunlight, but they didn't gleam anymore. They looked like what they were, tin and enamel pinned to a shirt that had never been tested by anything harder than a parking lot confrontation with an unarmed old man. He opened his mouth. To apologize, to explain, to salvage something. Vernon looked at him. Just looked. And Prescott's mouth closed. Some silences say more than any sentence ever could. This one said, "I know exactly what you are, and now so does everyone else." Colonel Mercer spoke into her radio. "Convoy is Oscar Mike and 5. Package is secure." She turned to Vernon and for the first time allowed herself a small smile. "Ready to go home, Master Sergeant?" Vernon Atkins looked at the diner, at Rosie, at the town that had watched him bleed in silence. He picked up his backpack, the one that carried everything he owned, and slung it over one shoulder. "I've been ready," he said, "for a very long time." The video hit the internet at 11:47 a.m. Glenn, the postal worker who'd kept his phone recording in his pocket, uploaded it to Twitter before the convoy reached the interstate. No caption. The footage didn't need one. 12 seconds to the first share. 10,000 views by noon. 100,000 by 1. By the time Vernon's convoy crossed the Virginia state line, 2 million people had watched a sergeant slam a homeless veteran's face into a table, and the number was climbing like a fever chart. Hashtag Justice for Vernon trended first. Then hashtag Salute to Service. Then hashtag Gray Hill Shame. The kind of digital wildfire that turns a small-town diner into a global stage overnight. The young woman from Athens posted her own footage. Different angle. It captured what Glenn's hadn't, the crack of Vernon's forehead hitting the table. That video hit 4 million views in 6 hours. CNN ran it as breaking. Fox led with the veterans angle. MSNBC with racial profiling. The New York Times had a reporter on a plane to Georgia before dinner. By nightfall, Gray Hill was the most searched town in America. The Sheriff Howard Kinsley, who'd been fishing when the world caught fire, held a press conference at 6. He read from a prepared statement. His voice shook. "Sergeant Prescott has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending." A reporter cut him off. "Sheriff, are you aware Prescott has had 7 complaints in 3 years, 4 involving people of color, 2 involving homeless individuals, all dismissed without investigation?" The press conference lasted 11 minutes. Kinsley answered 4 questions, deflected 9, walked away while reporters were still shouting. 3 days later, Prescott was terminated. The letter cited conduct unbecoming excessive force, racial bias, and falsification of a dispatch report. He'd radioed dispatch claiming Vernon was refusing to cooperate and possibly mentally unstable. Hale's body camera told a different story. His badge was collected on a Tuesday. He walked out carrying a cardboard box past 3 news vans and said nothing. He climbed into his Crown Victoria and left the lot for the last time. Torres was promoted, not by seniority, by conscience. 6 words to internal affairs. "I should have stopped it sooner." He became community liaison officer. His first act, a protocol requiring officers to verify complaints before confronting civilians. Hale's notebook, 6 pages, entered the official record. Her real-time account was cited in the termination letter. She received a commendation for integrity. She framed it next to her academy diploma. Some days it made her proud, other days it made her sick because she had written everything down and still hadn't stepped between Prescott and that old man. In Washington, the ceremony was everything the parking lot was not. The East Room of the White House, polished floors, flags at attention, 200 guests, cameras broadcasting to 14 countries. Vernon Atkins walked in wearing a uniform he hadn't worn in years. It fit. After the shelters, the overpasses, the hunger, it still fit. The creases were sharp. The metals in place. New boots issued that morning made the same sound on marble that his old ones had made on gravel. 14 men stood in the front row. The men he'd pulled from fire. Some had gray hair now. Some had children older than they'd been in Fallujah. One was in a wheelchair. One had driven 11 hours from Montana with his wife and 3 kids. They were alive because Vernon Atkins had crawled into a burning vehicle 5 times and refused to stop. The president spoke for 7 minutes. When he placed the Medal of Honor around Vernon's neck, the same medal Prescott had called a Halloween costume, the room stood. Every person. And in the front row, 14 men saluted through tears they didn't bother to hide. Vernon was offered housing through the VA, a 2-bedroom in Arlington with a view of the Potomac. Medical benefits, PTSD counseling, a full pension retroactively reinstated, lost in a bureaucratic shuffle 4 years ago. Nobody had followed up. Until now. He accepted all of it. Then he went back to Gray Hill. Not because he had to, because he chose to. Because a 70-year-old woman had given him coffee without asking, and a town had shown him both the worst and the possibility of something better. He walked into Rosie's diner on a Thursday morning. The bell jingled. Rosie looked up. She didn't speak. She poured coffee, set it on the corner table, and sat down across from him. On the wall behind the counter in a wooden frame hung a photograph, Vernon in dress uniform standing in the East Room. Rosie had cut it from the front page of the Gray Hill Gazette. Next to it, taped to the wall with Scotch tape already curling at the edges, was the creased photograph from Vernon's backpack. The woman, the boy, the yellow curtains, the kitchen that didn't exist anymore except on the wall of a diner where a man had once been given coffee without being asked if he could pay. Vernon Atkins volunteers now. 3 days a week, he drives a VA shuttle from Gray Hill to the Veterans Center in Macon. He picks up men who look the way he used to look, torn jackets, canvas bags, eyes that have seen things they can't unsee. He doesn't give them speeches. He gives them rides. And coffee. Always coffee. On the first Tuesday of every month, he sits at the corner booth in Rosie's diner and meets with any veteran who needs someone to talk to. No appointment, no paperwork, no questions about insurance or eligibility. Just a man who understands what it costs to serve and what it costs to come home and find out that nobody saved a place for you. Rosie never charges him. He pays anyway. Every time. Exact change left on the table next to an empty mug. Some debts aren't about money, but the ones that are Vernon pays. Last winter, a man walked into Rosie's diner at 6 in the morning. He wore a jacket 2 sizes too big and boots held together with duct tape. He sat in the corner booth, Vernon's booth, and stared at the menu for a long time without ordering. Rosie brought him coffee. He shook his head, said he didn't have any money. Vernon was sitting 3 booths away. He stood up, walked over, and sat down across from the man. Didn't say hello. Didn't introduce himself. Just said, "What do you want to eat?" The man ordered eggs and toast. Vernon paid. They sat together for an hour. The man talked. Vernon listened. When the man got up to leave, Vernon handed him a card, the VA Center in Macon, a phone number, a name to ask for. "They lost my paperwork too," Vernon said. "Took 8 months to find me, but they found me." The man looked at the card, then at Vernon, then at the torn military jacket hanging on the coat rack by the door, the same one Vernon still wore even now, even after the Pentagon had issued him a new one. He wore the old one because it reminded him, not of what he'd lost, of what he'd survived. The man put the card in his pocket and left. 3 weeks later, he called the number. 6 months after that, he had a roof over his head and an appointment with a counselor who understood what mortar fire sounds like at 3 in the morning. His name was Terrence. He was 29. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had been living in his car for 11 months. Nobody had asked him if he needed help, not once, until a man in a torn jacket bought him eggs and toast at a diner in Gray Hill, Georgia. That is what Vernon Atkins does now, not because anyone ordered him to, not because a camera is watching. Because he remembers what it felt like to sit in a booth with nothing but a cup of coffee and pray that nobody told him to leave. 37,000 veterans are sleeping without a roof tonight in America. Some under bridges, some in shelters, some in the back seats of cars they can't afford to put gas in. Some of them are sitting in diners right now nursing a cup of coffee, hoping nobody asks them to leave. Vernon was one of them, a man who crawled into fire 5 times to save 14 lives, then spent years crawling through a system that lost his paperwork and forgot his name. He didn't ask for a convoy. He didn't ask for a ceremony. He asked for a cup of coffee and a place to sit down. What he got was a knee in his back and handcuffs on his wrists. It shouldn't take a convoy of Humvees and a Medal of Honor to remind us that the man sitting alone in the corner booth is a human being. It shouldn't take a colonel in dress uniform to make a sergeant see what Rosie Callahan saw the moment Vernon walked through the door. A soldier, a man, someone worth a cup of coffee. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you were in that diner? Would you have stood up? Would you have stayed silent? Be honest, because the answer matters more than you think. If this story hit, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because stories like Vernon's don't get told unless someone is listening.